It was a quiet morning in the valley of cedar pines. The sky was painted with soft shades of gold, and a gentle breeze stirred the dew-kissed grass. Birds sang their first songs of the day, while the river that wound its way through the meadows sparkled in the light. Everything seemed calm, serene, untouched. But hidden among the tall grass, a pair of trembling ears rose slowly, cautiously. A young fox kit, no more than a few weeks old, poked its tiny head out of the burrow. Its fur was still patchy in places, its eyes wide and curious, yet full of uncertainty. Unlike the other kits of its age, this one was alone. Somehow, the little fox had lost track of its family. Perhaps its mother had gone out to hunt and the others had followed. Perhaps something had frightened them into running deeper into the woods. But for this fragile creature, the world suddenly seemed much bigger, colder, and more dangerous. The kit sniffed the air nervously, its small nose twitching as it searched for the familiar scent of its mother. Nothing. Only the damp smell of soil and the distant aroma of pine needles carried on the wind. Its heart pounded faster, paws shifting restlessly in the dirt. It let out a faint whimper, a tiny cry that disappeared into the vastness of the meadow. Suddenly, the stillness of the morning was broken. Dark clouds began to roll over the mountains, swallowing the sunlight inch by inch. A low rumble echoed across the valley, thunder, announcing the storm that was about to arrive. The fox kit froze, ears flattened against its head. It had never faced a storm alone before. The sky darkened, the first drops of rain tapped against its fur, and then in an instant, the gentle drizzle turned into a heavy downpour. The wind howled. Branches snapped. The earth itself seemed to tremble as water rushed through the meadow, forming streams where there had been none. The little fox was soaked within moments, shivering as the cold bit into its fragile body. Its paws slipped in the mud as it scrambled, searching for cover, but the grass bent and lashed in the storm, offering no protection. And then came the roar of the river. What had been a calm, sparkling ribbon of water in the morning had now transformed into a raging torrent. Waves smashed against the banks, carrying broken branches and debris. The kit edged closer, drawn by instinct, perhaps hoping the river could lead it to its family. But the closer it came, the louder, wilder, more terrifying the water became. One misstep was all it took. The fox slipped. With a desperate cry, it tumbled into the river. The current seized it instantly, dragging the tiny body downstream. The kit struggled, thrashing its legs, its mouth gasping for air between waves. Its fur clung tightly to its body, making it heavier, weaker, more helpless. The river tossed it like a leaf caught in a storm, spinning it around and forcing it under again and again. Its cries were swallowed by the thunder. Its eyes were wide with terror, its breath breaking into sharp gasps. The world around it blurred, water, trees, flashes of lightning. The kit clawed at the surface, but the current pulled harder. Every moment seemed like the last. But fate had not abandoned the little fox. High on the riverbank, a man named Elijah Martin was hiking with his dog Scout. Elijah was no stranger to storms. A retired forest ranger, he had spent years walking these woods, watching over the wildlife, and respecting the untamed power of nature. But nothing could have prepared him for what he saw that day. Scout barked first, a sharp, frantic sound that cut through the rain. Elijah turned, following his dog's gaze, and froze. Out in the middle of the raging river, a small reddish shape struggled desperately against the waves. A fox kit, Elijah gasped. Without thinking, he threw his backpack to the ground and ran toward the water's edge. Scout barked louder, running back and forth as if urging him on. Elijah's heart pounded as he scanned the river, calculating the current, the distance, the chance of reaching the little one in time. The fox kit was barely afloat now, its head bobbing above the surface only to vanish again. Elijah knew that in just seconds, it would be gone. "Stay here, Scout," he shouted. Then he jumped. The cold water slammed into him like a wall. It stole his breath, pressed against his chest, and tried to drag him under. But Elijah was strong, his muscles trained by years of work in the wild. He forced his arms forward, cutting through the water stroke by stroke. His eyes never left the tiny fox. The kit thrashed weakly, eyes rolling in panic, as if sensing the last of its strength fading. Elijah swam harder, ignoring the branches that scraped against him, ignoring the roar in his ears. And then, finally, his hand brushed against wet fur. The fox squealed, twisting in fear, thinking it was another predator. But Elijah held firm, cradling the fragile body with as much gentleness as the raging water allowed. "I've got you," he whispered, though his words were drowned by the storm. With the kit pressed against his chest, he turned back toward the shore. Each movement was a battle, every stroke a fight against the river's grip. Scout barked furiously from the bank, running alongside, never taking his eyes off his human and the tiny bundle he carried. At last, Elijah's feet struck the muddy bottom. He stumbled, half dragged by the current, but somehow made it to the bank. Scout rushed forward, teeth grabbing at Elijah's sleeve, pulling him the last few feet to safety. Collapsing on the ground, Elijah gasped for air, clutching the shivering fox kit to his chest. Its tiny body trembled violently, but it was alive. Its eyes, wide and terrified, looked up at him, not with trust yet, but with the desperate instinct of a creature who had been given a second chance. "Easy, little one," Elijah whispered, wrapping his jacket around the soaked kit. "You're safe now." Scout sniffed the fox curiously, tail wagging cautiously. The kit flinched at first, but then went still, exhausted. Rain poured down on the three of them, but for a moment, none of it mattered. They had made it. Elijah pulled the jacket tighter around the trembling little body. The fox's chest rose and fell rapidly, but there was life, fragile and stubborn, clinging on. Scout pressed closer, his wet fur brushing against Elijah's arm, eyes fixed on the bundle in his hands as though he, too, understood the weight of the moment. "Let's get you home," Elijah whispered, though the storm swallowed his voice. He rose unsteadily to his feet, mud dripping from his boots, water running down his face, and began the long climb back toward his cabin on the hill. Scout trotted beside him, occasionally glancing back at the roaring river as if to make sure it stayed behind them. The cabin's light was a beacon in the dark. When Elijah pushed open the wooden door, warmth and the faint crackle of the fireplace greeted them. He set the fox down gently on a thick towel near the fire, steam rising as the flames dried its soaked fur. The little kit shivered violently at first, then slowly relaxed as the heat wrapped around its fragile frame. Scout settled next to it, head resting on his paws, watchful and protective. Every so often he leaned forward to sniff or nudge the tiny creature, careful not to frighten it. The kit blinked weakly, exhaustion overtaking fear, and let its head drop onto the towel. Elijah filled a bottle with warm milk and knelt beside the fire. "Here, little one," he said softly, guiding the teat toward the kit's mouth. For a moment it resisted, too tired to respond, but then instinct took over. It began to drink, slowly, greedily, as though every drop carried life itself. The hours passed. Rain still hammered against the cabin walls, but inside, peace returned. The fox kit curled into a small ball on the towel, breathing evenly at last. Scout shifted closer, his warm body forming a shield around the new guest. Elijah sat back in his chair, watching the scene with quiet relief. By morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight spilled into the room, painting golden patterns across the floor. When Elijah opened his eyes, the fox kit was stirring. Shakily, it pushed itself onto unsteady paws, wobbling at first, then taking a few uncertain steps across the wooden floor. Scout lifted his head, tail thumping softly against the boards, as if encouraging his new companion. From that day on, the cabin was no longer a home for two, but for three. The kit, still weak but growing stronger, followed Scout everywhere. Out in the yard, it tried to mimic his movements, sniffing the ground when he did, bounding after him when he ran. Elijah laughed from the porch, watching their games unfold against the backdrop of the forest. Days turned into weeks. The fox discovered flowers in the meadow, butterflies dancing in the air, the cool rush of wind across the hills. In town, villagers would pause to smile at the unlikely pair, dog and fox, racing side by side in the grass. The little one's spots of youth slowly gave way to sleek fur, its steps growing more confident, more wild. Yet Elijah knew the truth. The fox was not meant to stay. One evening, he spread a forest map across the table, candlelight flickering across the lines and markings. He traced the path back to the river valley where they had first met, the place where, perhaps, the kit's family still searched. Scout sat beside him, ears pricked, as if sensing the weight of the plan. The next morning, the three set out together. Elijah's old truck rumbled down a forest road, sunlight breaking through the canopy in fleeting bursts. Scout sat proudly in the passenger seat, while the fox pressed its small nose against the window, eyes wide as the trees streamed past. At last, they reached the edge of the forest. Elijah opened the door, setting the kit gently onto the ground. It stood still for a long moment, ears twitching, nose quivering as it tested the air. Scout hovered nearby, tail swaying slowly, silent but steady. Then, movement. A figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, a full-grown fox, her fur shining in the sunlight, her gaze locked on the kit. She did not move forward. She simply waited. The kit froze, staring. Then, with a sudden burst of recognition, it darted across the clearing. The two met in silence, nuzzling, pressing close, their bodies trembling with reunion. The mother licked her kit's head gently, as though to reassure herself it was real. From the edge of the clearing, Elijah stood still, throat tight. Scout sat beside him, ears low, watching every step. When the kit finally turned back, eyes glistening, Elijah lifted a hand. "Go on," he said softly. "Go live where you belong." For a moment, time seemed to hang suspended. Then the kit turned, pressed against its mother once more, and together they disappeared into the forest's embrace. Elijah exhaled slowly, tears blurring the sunlight streaming through the trees. Scout gave a low bark, as if saying goodbye, then leaned against Elijah's leg. The man smiled faintly, placing a hand on his companion's head. "We did the right thing, Scout," he whispered. And as they walked back toward the waiting truck, the river glimmered in the distance, peaceful once more, carrying with it the memory of a storm, a rescue, and a bond that would never be forgotten.